So officially, hello everyone and welcome to the cloud versus on-premise debate and make a fully informed decision for the next chapter of your business. Or if you're a consultant and you need to help other companies set up or choose the right solution for them. So just to let you know that please stay until the end of the session because we will have a Q&A at the end, and please be aware that the event is recorded and the link to the recording will be sent to you within several days. So some information about what we will be talking about. So you will learn about what is a QMS. We'll talk about cloud versus on-premise and what does it really mean. We'll talk about issues like security, costs, day-to-day issues, and the usage. And in general, you will be able to understand what fits best the company where you're working at or a company where you're doing a consultation for. So 1 second, this slide got stuck. Yeah, okay. So this webinar will be around 90 minutes and it includes a Q&A session at the end. So please stay till the end. Also, make sure to stay until the end of the lecture to receive the certificate of attendance. You don't have to stay for the full Q&A, but we will check automatically for the names of the people who stayed until the end of the session, and they will get a certificate of attendance emailed to them. And our event partner, Qualio, sponsors the certificates, and we will send them to you within what we'll address it either directly or at the Q&A session at the end. And please send me a message in the chat if you have any issues or questions. Okay, and if you have any problems with connection or visual or sound problems, please first refresh your browser. It usually helps. So at Qualistry, we aim to provide pharma professionals worldwide with freely accessible education and industry insights. And we managed to do it with the help of our incredible partners. So I want to thank to Qualio, our main sponsoring partner for this webinar, for making this event happen. If you have never heard of Qualio before, here is a brief overview of what they do. So Qualio is a cloud quality management software for all life science companies. They serve medical device and pharmaceutical companies' needs of a secure and scalable quality management system with the flexibility to support their evolving needs. They meet the challenges of their clients by cutting through the complexity to optimize and automate critical quality processes to make sure it's tangible, easy to use. And sorry, I have some issues with the slide. They're not progressing according to how I wanted. And just to general information is that their team is distributed across North America and Europe. So now let's experiences quality assurance and regulatory affairs. And right now she helps companies adapt to and master new and complex subject matters. And now to our main speaker and expert at our webinar, Harsh Thakkar, the CEO at Qualitative, a consultancy where they help life sciences companies build a customized and phase-appropriate QMS. So Harsh has a master's degree in regulatory affairs and quality assurance for drugs, biologics, and medical devices. He is also an American Society for Quality Certified Quality Auditor and Certified Manager of Quality and Organization Excellence. And so, Meg, please take it from here.
Thank you, Jan. Is everyone able? Oops. One moment. Apologies. That should be better. Is everyone able to see my screen and hear me okay?
Yeah, so please confirm because I see some people writing about the voice disruptions. So hopefully it's not for everybody, but usually it's user related. So with such cases, please refresh your browsers. But let us know if you can see right now Meg on the screen, if you can hear her, and if you see her slides. Okay, so we see most of the people saying that it's fine, very clear.
Terrific. Thank you, Jan. Harsh, I'll turn it over to you so you can kick us off with our requirements for eQMS.
Thank you, Meg, and thank you, Jan, for the introduction. Is everybody able to hear me okay? I guess, yes? Great. All right. So I know this session is about choosing between a cloud and on-premise QMS, but I always like to start things from the basics, the fundamentals, right? So it helps us make a better decision because, as you all know, it's there's pros and cons to both sides that we'll be diving into this session, later on. But let's just start with the basics of what a quality management system is. So if you look at this slide, you see that it's basically a framework of documentation and records that an organization creates so that it has consistency in how it operates and how it produces their products and services. So if you look at this hierarchy of how the documents are structured, you see that policies and objectives are at the top level. So these are documents such as a quality policy or a quality standard, and these are the why documents, right? Like, why are you doing business? What are your objectives, whether you're in life sciences or any other industry? These are your why documents. The next tier comes down to procedures. So how are you going to achieve what you said you're going to achieve in your policy or objective? So the procedures are how, who does it, when do they do it, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what you would get in procedures. So procedures are going to be more detailed. As you go through this hierarchy, you'll see that the level of detail increases as you go from top to bottom, because you're adding more context to that document. And then the third layer, you have the work instructions. So this gets even down to very details of maybe you mention the departments or mention the systems or have screenshots of how your users are going to interact within that system. And the bottom piece is quality records, right? Because I'm sure everyone's heard, working in the regulated space, that if it's not documented, it's not done. So to be able to demonstrate that you are creating quality products and you're maintaining compliance, you need to have records or objective evidence that shows how you met those things. And these are the ones that you would generate in day-to-day operations. So just keep this in mind. These are the 4 different layers that you would find in any QMS. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into all of these here, but these are, some standards. So when you're creating your documentation, there are international standards. A lot of these from ISO. You have the ISO 9001 2015 and the 9004 2018, which are specifically around quality management, just, the basic requirements of quality management. You have ISO 13485, which is for medical devices. And then you have the last one, which is specifically for application of QMS requirements in the context of computer software and computer systems. But understand that this is not a full inclusive list, right? These are the international standards. It's a good starting point if you're building a QMS, but then you also have to consider other requirements from different regions. So let's say, for example, you have ISO 13485 for medical devices, but if you're operating in US or marketing products in an FDA regulated region, you also want to follow FDA 21 CFR Part 820, which is also for medical devices, right? So these are good starting points, but just take into account FDA, EU, Australia, Asia Pacific, whichever region you're located in, there's going to be other regulatory requirements that you would have to follow in addition to these international standards. Next slide. All right. So now that you know what a QMS looks like, and you have a good starting point of what the requirements should be for a QMS, let's start talking about what it means to you, right? What are your requirements, whether you're a quality manager, director, or you're an IT or any role, and you're looking into building a QMS or buying a QMS software, you have to start with what are you looking for? What are you going to do in that system? So let's go into some of those process areas. So as you can see on this slide, right, there are, based on the maturity of your organization, you might be looking at including different process areas within a QMS solution, whether you go with on-premise or cloud systems. So you can see quality risk management, which is, how do you do risk assessments for your processes or your systems, and use different frameworks for doing risk assessments. You have employee training. How do you maintain the curriculum? How do you ensure that employees are trained and you maintain a record of their training, or you keep records of their job descriptions or CVs and that kind of stuff. Then you have the quality events, which is a really big and a popular feature that many companies look to implement. This would include things like change controls, kappas, deviations, non-conformances, and you would be managing all these processes within a QMS system. Next, we have audits and inspection. Again, a huge area, depending on how much activity you have within that process. You're probably doing internal audits to audit your departments and see how those departments are in compliance with your own procedures. But also you're doing audits to, externally to audit your suppliers and, contract manufacturing or research organizations to see if they're fit and if they have a good QMS to be able to do business with you. And then last one is documentation. You have all these processes and all these records. You're going to need a singular one location to keep all your documentation categorized into these different process areas. And documentation, you might have processes, systems, equipments, so it can get pretty intense as you mature and as your QMS gets to the next level. So a lot of the companies usually will start with document management and training as the first modules, because that's at an early stage company, you would see that, and then they'll slowly go into quality events, risk management, and audits as the next ones. But it's really a preference of what you're looking for and which modules do you want to implement first when you go live with your QMS. Next slide. So this goes into more of, this slide now goes into more of what do you want from a QMS solution, right? There's many tools and technologies in the market. Qualio is one of the best QMS providers. It's a very simplified tool that I love using. But, you want to understand what are you trying to achieve within that, solution? What are your business, technical, and regulatory requirements? So if you start from the left, right, you obviously want your business process to be easily embedded into the system workflows, right? So you want to look for a system that's easily configurable so you can take your business process and configure those automations and workflow in that specific eQMS system. So that's a very important piece. The next one is configuration and migration. And integrations, right? So you might be using a QMS today, or you have a paper QMS, or you're using a hybrid approach, but you're considering to go into a cloud or SaaS QMS provider. So you might have some migration involved. You might have some integrations with other systems. If you're using other systems to manage your other processes. So you want to be able to look for a solution that allows you to easily integrate and configure, so you can have all these processes connected to each other. The third one here is also very important. I'm a big fan of metrics. They tell you whether a process is working or not and what you need to do to fix it. So you also want a solution that not just collects and automates data, but also gives you some reporting capabilities so you can understand how your processes are working. You probably want to know how many people are completing their training on time, or how many deviations have a category of human error, or whatever your metric is, right? A good QMS solution will be able to give you all the pieces to build these reports based on your use case. So that's definitely a big one. And the last one is compliance, right? So if you're looking for electronic solution, whether it's QMS or any electronic solutions in the life sciences space, you obviously need to take into account audit trails, electronic signatures, and the different IT security controls. And most solutions have these features built in because they know that they're serving the life sciences space. Next slide. All right, so now that we've covered what a QMS should look like, we've covered what are some of the requirements that you would be looking for when you are implementing a QMS, so you have a good idea of what you're looking for. Now you come to a point where you have to decide whether you're going to choose a cloud versus on-premise, right? So again, before we go into the good and bad of both the solutions, let's just understand what these two mean so that it can help us make a good decision. Next slide. All right, so when you look at an on-premise solution, it simply means that the solution is hosted in-house. So it's hosted within your organization. It's managed by your internal teams, your internal IT team. You could have a third-party vendor that supports you, but the majority of the responsibility is on you to manage that system. And it's installed and running on the computers that are on-premise. So on the right, the visual that you see, there's two types of on-premise models. So you might have, in some cases, on-premise without virtualization, which basically just means that each computer has a program or a software, and you have to get a license, and that user who manages that computer only can access that tool. It's not available to others. So if you want it on more computers, you're going to have to buy more licenses. So think of it as one-to-one, right? That's why you have 3 computers, 3 users. The one on the right is also on-premise, but with virtualization, where you can manage certain servers in-house that you can use to host different applications. But now it's a one-to-many relationship, because now users within your organization can access these software and systems, but you are still maintaining those servers and the storage and all the hardware, whether on-site or at a different data center that you are managing. So just remember, these are the few points about on-premise, and then next slide, we can look into cloud solutions. So for cloud solutions, the model, looking at our previous diagram, you can see that for cloud solutions is basically hosted by a vendor, on external servers. So you don't get to manage those servers. You don't have any control over it. And you're basically paying on a subscription model. You're paying, monthly or quarterly or annual charges to use that software. So the software is managed and maintained by a cloud service provider, and you're accessing that software via the internet. So you can see on the left side, the third-party servers located at a different site. You have the globe that represents internet, and then the 2 boxes now represent 2 different organizations, right? Because your cloud service provider is not just providing a solution to you, they might be providing it to 20 other clients. So it's just very scalable model. You don't need to maintain any of your own hardware or infrastructure, and you just pay as you go for the services that you use. And it can be used by different clients in the industry. Next slide. So this slide is actually my favorite slide in this presentation, because when we talk about cloud, there are actually 3 models under cloud-based solutions. So at the very top, you'll see you have SaaS, which is software as a service. So this model basically includes, it actually means the app or the web application that you see on your screen as a user. So examples of some of this SaaS tools are Zoom or G Suite or Dropbox. That's the tool that you see on your screen. Next you have platform as a service. So platform doesn't include the application. It includes the things. You can see the icons in the bottom. So the platform includes all the other pieces without the software application, but you can use that to build your own software on top of it. So a really good example of platform as a service is Salesforce Lightning, which actually for one of our clients at Qualtivate, they they chose Salesforce Lightning as their platform, a cloud platform, and they wanted to build a repository to manage all their patients that were enrolling in clinical trials. So in that case, Salesforce is considered as platform as a service, and then on top of that, you can build the app using the Salesforce objects and libraries and the Salesforce developing language, because that's what you purchase. So you're only paying for the platform and you manage the app and the users. And the last one is infrastructure as a service. So this is, your AWS servers or Microsoft Azure. This is basically just the server, the storage. It doesn't include the database. It doesn't include the web app. So you can see the lines on the top. SaaS includes everything. Platform includes a subset of it, and infrastructure includes a subset of that. So this is a good visual to just keep in mind. Next slide. So this slide is pretty heavy, but what this really means is now we're looking at all four together, right? So you have on-premise on the left. Everything that's in red, you're going to be managing as an on-premise solution. Then you have your infrastructure as a service. So there's some blue shaded colors there that are going to be managed by your service provider. Then you go into platform as a service. So the red decreases and the blue increases. So more things are managed by your service provider, very few by you. And then when you go into software as a service, is basically you're not managing anything. Everything's done by your service provider. And a good way of understanding this this diagram is I found this person who was an architect, a software architect at IBM, and he came with this analogy of a pizza and how you can understand this, right? So on premise on the left is you making the pizza. You're responsible for all the ingredients, the oven, the dough, everything is your responsibility. Infrastructure is, think of it as a frozen pizza. You go to the store, you buy it, but you still have to come home and put it in the oven to make that pizza. Platform as a service is you sitting at a table, opening your app and looking up at, a restaurant delivery app to get a pizza so you can have it at your table. And software as a service is you going out to a restaurant and ordering a pizza and enjoying it, right? So just wanted to throw that out there. It's funny, I like learning things with a different context in mind. So I hope that's helpful. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to be diving into the benefits of cloud versus on-premise. And from here on, I'll give it over to you, Meg. Thank you.
Thanks, Harsh. And thanks for that food metaphor. I always love a good food metaphor to tie back to quality.
Yep.
So let's talk about the benefits of cloud and on-prem software. So you have two options when it comes to hosting. As Harsh was saying, benefits of the cloud is it's accessible from anywhere, and you can rely on that vendor for upgrades and support on an ongoing basis. With on-premises, your data is hosted and maintained in-house, and it has a one-time perpetual purchase. So those are some of the kind of high-level benefits. We'll talk a little bit more and dive into some more details here. So security is another important thing to consider when you're looking at the cloud versus on-premises. We love our cartoons here at Qualio, and I felt like this slide really nicely captures why businesses turn to on-prem systems, because they think they sound like more security, protection, and business continuity, and that's the logic of on-premise, is that the data is more secure if your business takes full responsibility for protecting it. And the need for data security can be quite high. As you can see, some of these fines have triggered some hefty, some of these breaches, excuse me, have triggered some hefty fines when it comes to data security breaches. It really highlights the criticality of data security. An average breach costs over $4 million. And the FTC and others are following the EU's lead in privacy and data security. So on-premises systems are going to let you be a better option if you want complete independent control of your QMS and its data. Businesses with high levels of protection needs, like defense or cybersecurity organizations, might often opt for this on-premises for this reason. There's no relying on a third party to look after your data, and with regulations like HIPAA and GDPR, your risk appetite may not be that high. This allows you to keep everything under lock and key in a physical environment that your organization can control, which can seem more more secure defense against hackers and malicious actors. The fact that on-premise systems functions without internet can also be a factor in considering your business continuity plans. Why go on-prem? Again, because you can control that data security yourself. You can access it even without the internet. I'm sure we've all had downtime with our internet connections. And there's no third parties involved. Again, it's solely that organization's responsibility to manage. However, if you're looking at these stats, it reveals that some of these data breaches actually come from the inside and are internal of nature and not external. And on-premise, unfortunately, doesn't protect you from that. So I found some of these statistics really fascinating. 70% of all successful data attacks were done by employees and insiders. Again, that's not going to help you on an on-prem solution either. And then 19% were caused by stolen or compromised credentials. So security for on-premises, it doesn't necessarily mean constant access to your data either. It can be extremely frustrating for companies to lose time and productivity to on-premise hardware upgrades. A hidden hefty cost, which Gartner calculates to cost organizations over $4,500 per minute. Automatic software updates from the cloud mean no more hardware upgrades, and Qualio, like most reputable cloud vendors, offer a guaranteed minimum uptime. So thinking about independence and weighing it against those burdens when you're considering cloud premise versus on premises. And with the cloud, it can be argued that managing your data is in the modern cloud just as safe and secure, and maybe even safer. In the event of a disaster, fires, floods, other natural disasters, your data isn't lost with your servers. It's backed up on a cloud and can be accessed immediately on any device. And in a ISO 27001 compliant cloud vendor dedicated to maintaining the data, you can remember that cloud-based subscriptions give you the ability to walk away if you aren't happy. They can look after it all for you and constantly be on the lookout for bugs, weaknesses, threats, vulnerabilities, all while you can just manage your own quality management system and not have to worry about patches and upgrades or security updates. You can rely on your vendor for all of that. And those usually can be pushed across an entire QMS in a matter of minutes, rather than having downtime for on-premises upgrades. And then I thought this was a lovely quote from one of our customers about using eQMS vendors. It's their reputation. ISO 27001 is recently a new certification for us at Qualio. So like other cloud-based providers, we are very much thinking with security in mind. So what does it really come down to? One of the things that really comes down to is risks. Like most of our decisions in quality management, it all comes back to risk. So making those risk-based decisions to determine what is right for your organization and its business processes. So I like this little map of how you can get through that. Establishing your risk criteria, identifying those risks, analyzing those risks, and evaluating what's right for your business and prioritizing your risk treatments will help you kind of guide what your appetite is for security risks when it comes to making these decisions. You can manage risks in the clouds several different ways. It's really an opportunity. I think Harsh's pizza metaphor was really great. You can really lean on your vendor's expertise, their certifications, those agreements, and their own policies and procedures to mitigate the risks here and rely on your cloud vendor. And SLAs are required by EU Annex 11. So that's just another way we can leverage our quality vendors. You can ask things like, are they financially secure and robust? What is their backup testing and recovery policies like? And how often will they let you review or audit them for their effectiveness? So useful reading related to the validation and infrastructures, multi-tenancy using SaaS, computer software assurance from FDA recently came out. I would highly recommend reading that. It's a brave new world when it comes to validation. So cloud versus the on-premises, other factors to consider. You want to take us on this, Harsh?
Sure.
Thanks.
Right. So, as you can see on this slide, the question that I get many times working with clients is, how do I audit or how do I assess the right supplier that can help me with my QMS solution, right? So there's going to be a bunch of things that are involved. The need to audit the supplier should be based on the risk, right? What you're trying to even within audits, there are different ways. Some companies may be able to provide a desktop or a remote questionnaire that your cloud supplier can fill in and give you some documentation to review. Or in other cases, you might want to send out an auditor to go to your cloud supplier on site and review all of that documentation, right? With COVID, a lot of the things people have embraced doing audits remotely, and they've been able to get past the decision of assessing the fitness of the supplier to do business, and have been able to do a lot of the remote audits. So we're going to go through the next couple slides, including this one, to just see what are the different topics that you would want to consider when you're looking to qualify a QMS provider. Right. So the first one is you want to know about the company and their business health. So a lot of the information you can find maybe going to their website or following their social media pages. Just try to see how many people in the industry are using that solution, how many users they have, how long they've been in business, what are the partnerships they have, are they partnered with other industry entities or regulators or all that kind of stuff, right? So you want to know the image of that company. The next you want to know is certifications and standards. So as you can see, we covered in the previous slides about the ISO standards and different other standards. So a lot of the cloud service providers will go through this certification process and will have these certificates because that helps clients make a decision if they're trusting a provider that is certified and meets the international standard organization QMS requirements. So that's definitely one other thing you want to consider. Next is going to be the roadmap of how they're implementing different technologies and tools, right? So you want to know what that company, what kind of products are they providing today? What kind of software and features they're providing today? And what are they looking at in the next 5 or 10 years? Are they looking to provide other different tools, right? So you want to spend your time and have these discussions with your supplier so that maybe, you know, after a QMS, that supplier now is providing you with a different SaaS tool, maybe to work in a lab or in a manufacturing area. And if you are able to have those discussions early and understand how that company looks at their technologies and how they're bringing more tools, you can form a long-standing partnership with that service provider. And in the future, you might implement another solution if you're happy with their reliability and performance. And next one is migration support and exit planning. So this basically just means, you know, if you are not using a QMS today, are you going to get any support from your clouds or on-premise QMS provider to help you, you know, get all your data into the system, whether you're using paper or you're migrating from a different solution? What kind of support are you going to get? And if you do decide to move on from this service provider after 3 or 5 years, you're not happy, you want to go somewhere else, what do you need to do to have a successful exit and make sure that you get your data and move on to the new provider? Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's also one thing you have to consider and understand. It's like you sign a lease for a rental apartment. You want to know what it takes for you to move out and go somewhere else, right? You don't want to be stuck by, you know, any uh, legal language in any contract. So another thing to consider. And then I won't go into the business continuity and dependencies because Meg already touched on that, but you want to understand how the provider supports those areas. Next slide. Contracts and SLAs. Again, this is something that Meg touched on. So obviously you're going to have to, this is really important because the more time you spend on making sure that the language in the contracts and SLA and the agreements is answering all your questions, the less surprises you'll have once you start using the solution. And there's many templates, there's many regulations that and standards that give you a clear guide on what kind of questions or things you should be looking for. You know, how is the customer support from your service provider? What happens if the solution is down? What is the backup? Or you know, how do you get notified about new features and new releases? What happens, you know, if your data is at attack? How do you get notified about that, right? So there's a lot of things, you know, you have to cover in these contractual and service level documents. So make sure that all your questions are answered, or you at least know what happens in that scenario if you do come across it. And from here on, cloud versus on-premise, the cost benefits, I'll pass it on back to Meg.
Meg, I think you are muted. We cannot hear you, Meg.
Thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. Thank you, Harsh. Yes, another thing to keep in mind is costs. When making these decisions, sometimes we all know it comes down to the bottom line. So when we're looking at on-premise versus on the cloud, looking at costs, this is a nice slide that kind of just shows how much it stacks up with costs on the on-premise side. You've got server installation, you've got that server room to upkeep, there's the hardware, IT labor. So if a annual salary for an IT person is about 60,000 and they've got about a quarter of their time they spent maintaining this on-premise solution, it's about 15 grand in labor a year. So that'll be more costs. And then let's say for comparison's sake, and then there'll be that software on top. And then any extra software. So we're looking at quite the cost. Now, if we look at it again versus the cloud, all of those bundle things that you would normally pay with on-premise are now bundled with the cloud. It's a newer technology. They have often £1 million of investment spent on them, so they typically are about 10% more, or excuse me, much less than the on-premise software. So roughly on average, looking to spend about 20,000 per year. So looking at that side by side, we can see those expenditures can really add up. The cloud vendor is going to take all that software development, servers, all of that maintenance, all that extra hardware and cost. They're going to take care of all the support upgrades, maintenance, patches, bug fixes, developments. There should be minimal downtime. And there's no capital expenditure that depreciates over time with SaaS. So there's no future costs. Future costs, like replacing servers every 3 to 5 years, is another typical hardware refresh rates to calculate into with these budgets. So cloud overall costs roughly half as much as on-premises solutions. So industry findings. This study was done in the US, and it highlights long-term cost of ownership for the cloud servers versus on-premise. And here's a breakdown of typical monthly cost of each, taking into account things like updating servers every 3 years. And here we can see that on-premise is more than 4 times as expensive in the long run. So thinking about long-term cost, and I think that ROI number is really outstanding. Think about what the investment is and long term, how much you have to invest over time as well. And time. So we all know that time is money as well. So saving time helps as well with that return on investment. Other cost things to consider: time to value, your tax considerations, scaling going forward, and ongoing demands. So things you can think about, balancing that licenses or IT resources, lots of things to consider when coming down to costs. Now let's look at day-to-day usage. On the premise, it lets you equip your systems. They opt for it for these reasons. It's unlikely that your college admin activities require bandwidth and latency capabilities beyond what cloud vendors can provide. However, on-premise gives you the option to upgrade to whatever option you need as far as bandwidth and speed. There's no waiting for a vendor's quarterly updates. You can upgrade whenever you have the time, budget, and the resources. For day-to-day operations, the cloud allows you to have a single source of truth. When you have multiple sites, or if you are a remote company, it allows you to have all of your quality information in one place. Think about how you've worked during COVID and how many companies have gone remote or continued to work remotely in some capacity during this time. So it really gives you that competitive edge of being able to be in multiple places at once and everyone's still accessing the same quality management system. Data is another one. A common complaint from cloud skeptics is that you're losing control over your data by not hosting it yourself. But you can look at it the opposite way. Connecting your eQMS to an entire central cloud system gives you more control and visibility over your quality and compliance data that might simply not be possible with discrete, disconnected on-premise systems. By joining all sites and departments to uniform a cloud system, you can integrate and report on quality data from anywhere in your business. From audit findings in the site in California to CAPA statuses in a lab in Colorado, you can connect all of those things and have a lot more transparency across your QMS. Thinking about validation, using an eCloud, a cloud eQMS means removing the need to rework, retest, and rebuild your QMS by providing automated validation capabilities. It takes 8 to 4 months of work for a validation cycle that can be executed automatically in a matter of days. So it can free up a lot of time that way. On-premise, you can focus, if you move towards the cloud system, you can move away from simple quality assurance to real quality improvement, thinking about what you could do with the time you currently spent searching on-premise data, validating systems, working with IT to resolve issues. You can spend that time instead auditing, thinking about risk, and making more risk-based decisions. And then the last one I want to highlight is scaling. Just by buying more licenses, your team can expand and unlock new functionality. So it's a lot more scalable of a solution, perhaps than on-premise, depending on what your resources are. And then this is a case study we wanted to share. There'll be a link, and I believe this will be shared after. But it was just some great feedback about a customer who, like many companies, had found themselves working remotely during the pandemic, and some are thriving and continuing to work that way into the future. So yes, on the slides will be a link to that case study here. So Harsh, now that we've kind of gone through the definitions, the benefits, the costs, kind of the different decisions that you can make, which do you think you would choose, or which would you suggest to organizations?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to three main factors, right? The first one is you need to compare the cost. And I'm not going to go much into that. Meg had really good slides to show you what it takes to implement a cloud versus a on-premise solution. And this is the concept that can be applied not only to a QMS software, to any other solutions, right? Because that, if you look at how we operate at Qualtivate, let's say we're using a project management software. Do I really want to have an IT department and somebody to build that from scratch? No, because that's not a good use of the dollars that I have to spend on the business. I can just use a SaaS tool that's a project management tool, and it gives me the same features for like 1/5 or 1/10 of the price, right? So do that analysis the way Meg showed the slides. See what the cost means for you. You don't have to be down to every dollar, but just ballpark the numbers and understand whether cost is a very big factor in choosing. The next one is going to be scalability or flexibility or expandability, whatever you want to call it, right? Because what you need today is not something that's going to work for you 3 or 5 years from now, right? So have a decision with the people in your organization, bring the different groups together, your IT, your quality, your different business groups, and ask them questions about what are we looking from this solution 3 years from now, 5 years from now. We know what you want today. You want a documentation and training system. But what are you trying to do 3 or 5 years from now? That gives you a really good idea of whether this tool can flex as you flex, right? Because you don't want to go out 3 years later and do the same exercise, try to find another software, another audit, another validation cycle. You're burning a lot of time when you could be doing that to, expand your business and sell more products and services. So look at your strategy of what you're doing in the next 3, 5, or 10 years, and talk about it, with your supplier, your cloud supplier. Tell them that, hey, we might be looking into doing this. Is it on your roadmap? Maybe it's on their roadmap, and it's even a better decision for you to go with them, because now when they come out with the extra products, you can be one of their first users and scale and build a really, a tremendous partnership with that provider, which I've seen many small companies do. So that would be the second one. And the last one comes down to risk, or how much control do you really need from the solution, right? So again, this is a very interesting debate. That could be a whole new webinar for an hour and a half just on that topic, because everyone, is so passionate about risk management and risk assessment. But do what works for you. If you have an internal risk assessment process, use that to run these two scenarios and see how you can manage the risks, right? Like how can you manage the data? How can you manage the users' permissions, the system administration? In some cases, you can work with your cloud supplier to share your concerns about risk and see if there are any other opportunities or any other workarounds how you can get that control. It may not be full control like you would expect from an on-premise solution, but yes, it's still a conversation to be had, with your cloud supplier to say, hey, I'm really concerned about this, or I'm really concerned about my data or the users, and see what they can do for you and how they can help you mitigate some of that risk that you don't want to take. So those are, I think, the three factors that I would consider. Again, there could be multiple, but cost, scalability, and managing risk and managing data, these are the top three that you want to consider. And if you're leaning towards one versus the other, then that's a clear sign that you should be choosing that solution. And I think cloud QMS or cloud solutions usually win on the first and the second one. Risk is a very, debatable topic, but I think cloud QMS wins on those two fronts.
Terrific. I think the other thing I just like to add, kind of along with cost, is time. What kind of time do you have to invest in an on-premise solution versus what kind of time are you going to gain maybe on your timeline, expanding your business if you go with the cloud? So time is money. So kind of factoring that into costs. So thanks for that, Harsh. I think we're going to turn it over to questions now.
Yes, thanks, Meg. Thanks, Harsh. This is fantastic. So we do have a handful of really great questions, and being mindful of the time, we only have about 5 minutes or so for these questions. So the first question is...
Yeah, we are scheduled for 1.5 hours, so we actually have more.
Oh,
yeah,
perfect.
so
Perfect.
yeah, exactly. So feel free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then
Don't
never
get
mind.
stressed
We
out.
have about 35. But we do have some fantastic questions that I think both Harsh and Meg, you'll have some really great insight on. So the first question is, how long would you expect to take to transfer a site QMS to a cloud solution, including validation?
You want me to take that, Meg?
If you have experience, and then I can tack on, sure.
Sure. Yeah. So great question. It all starts with understanding the current state of your on-premise QMS, right? What sort of, going back to the slide about different processes, what processes are you currently managing in your QMS? If it's only documentation and training, that might be an easier shift. If it's like 7 different process areas, then that's definitely going to involve a lot of work, a lot of decision makers that you need to talk to and get their buy-in if they're ready to move into the cloud QMS, right? Because if you think of documentation and training, you might have a manager or a quality person in that department, but somebody else in audits and inspections may not be fully convinced that moving to cloud is the right thing, right? So you have to get all the right players and see what processes you're dealing with to move into cloud QMS. So that's definitely going to be understanding your current state. Now, when you've decided or you've got the buy-in from the people that yes, moving to cloud is the right decision, you've shortlisted 3 suppliers, you probably want to, put in like 2 to 4 weeks of time to talk to these suppliers or do an audit or an assessment, whatever your process is. So that's definitely going to be a factor before you even jump into validation and implementation. And then for validation, when you're talking to these suppliers, start asking questions about, how much validation documentation do they already have? Can you leverage that? And how does that match up with your internal validation policies, right? Many suppliers already have validation documents that are compliant with global regulations like FDA 21 CFR Part 11, Annex 11, data integrity. And if you do go and see that when you audit them, they have a really strong QMS and a validation testing process, then you're going to be able to leverage some of that documentation without having to do it entirely yourself. And this is like the whole back background about the new computer system assurance guidance is you're not expected to test everything from scratch, right? If your service provider has already tested the standard low risk functionality that if I click close, the screen closes, there's no point for you to test that. You want to test the features that mean something to your business process or to your configuration. A migration from either a on-premise or even a cloud to another cloud solution, including audits, including all the meetings, including testing, validation, to be anywhere between fastest 3 or 4 months to maybe 7 or 9 months, the longest.
Yeah, I would say that sounds pretty similar to what my experience. I think another thing to think about if you're thinking about making the move from one system to the other, cloud to cloud or on-premise to cloud, paper to cloud, whichever way you're going, I think it's a good time to assess your quality management system, your validation policy, things that you're going to bring over and really have a good plan and be organized. I think that will help speed up those timelines too. The more prepared you are for that project, I think that shorter that timeline can be. And you can really make a meaningful and valuable move. Maybe you had some policies or procedures that were specific to your old system. It's a good time to reevaluate them and build them for your new system. So not just we're just going to put it over here now, really evaluate and look at your system as a whole again.
Great, thanks. So the next question is a scenario. In this case, service provider becomes a business partner for an organization. In this case, what happens if the subscription is over and organization does not want to continue with the current service provider? Is there a risk about creating a dependency on a service? Oops, someone just said, sorry. Is there a risk about creating dependency on a service provider? If not, what is the workaround for the same?
It's a very specific scenario. Harsh, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe if you have any, because I really don't. I'm trying to see what would. So, what was the ending of the question? Can you repeat the last part?
Sure. Is there a risk about creating dependency on a service provider? And what happens if they don't want to continue with that current service provider?
Most reputable service providers are going to provide you access to your data for a period of time after your subscription ends. So if you're that organization, you'd want to make decisions about getting your data out of there, what you're going to do next with it. I think whether you use on-cloud premise service provider or an on-premise service provider, you're going to have a risk that your data is somewhere and you have to protect it. So you have to have mitigations around those.
Right. And I would just add to that, getting the data obviously is the number one thing that you want to factor in. But let's take a step further. What are you going to do after you get that data, right? So you need to have internal team members who can understand that data, because it's not going to look the same as it would look on a web application. It might be, in a big clunky file. So how are you going to parse that data out to understand what it really means? And what those elements mean, and how can you load that into your next system that you're trying to go to? So that's really understanding what file types are you going to get? What is the data format? How can you?
The next question is, what is the NIST requirement on the premise for on-premise QMS systems or data center? NIST, N-I-S-T is an acronym. Are either of you familiar with that?
I am not personally.
Yeah, I'm a bit familiar with it. So as far as I know, the NIST gives you the definitions of the different, the different elements of a cloud versus on-premise solution. It doesn't really go into quote unquote the prescription language that you might be looking for. It's not intended to do that. So if you want to really understand what is expected in an on-premise versus a cloud, you probably want to start looking at other documentation. And some of this that Meg shared in one of her slide was the GAMP infrastructure control, GAMP 5, which is, came out in 2008. So that is a great guidance for understanding just systems and how to deal with on-premise versus cloud, or how to evaluate your supplier. So NIST is going to be a consistent definition or terminology resource, but it's not going to give you the prescription of how to go about things. You might have to tap into other resources like the ISO standards or the GAMP or FDA or EU standards.
Thank you. So we actually have a few very similar questions in regards to, is there a hybrid approach with a platform-based and a cloud-based, or is it an all or nothing?
I think that infrastructure as a go ahead, Harsh. I'll let you take it.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, but I'll go after you.
I think that infrastructure as a system, as a service, is probably one of those kind of hybrids where you get the infrastructure, but you build on top of that. That is still kind of in the cloud, but it's kind of that happy medium, I would say. But Harsh, I'll let you share your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to say, go back to the example that I gave about Salesforce, right? That was a patient repository tool, but you could also hypothetically go and buy Salesforce Lightning, which is platform as a service. So you're buying the platform, hire a Salesforce developer, and then build your own QMS. I'm not saying you should do that, but yes, that is a possibility. You can go and just buy a platform or buy an infrastructure using a cloud subscription model, pay for those fees every month or however, and then build your custom application and database on top of it.
That's actually a perfect segue into the next question. Which part of the QMS system should be moved first? For example, Kappa, quality docs, what should kind of be the order of operations there?
So far, many are, smaller companies, less than 50 or less than 100 employees. They all go with documentation, training, and then move on to quality events like Kappas, change controls, and other areas.
Absolutely.
So these next two questions, I believe Meg will be the best to answer because they're Qualio specific. Does Qualio offer platform or infrastructure support options, or is it only SaaS?
Currently, we are only SaaS.
Okay. And then continuing that question is, has the eQMS platform provided by Qualio have been already validated following the GMP guidelines for the validation of computer systems and documentation?
We are currently revamping our validation documentation to be in line with the new GAMP 2nd edition, as well as the new FDA computer software assurance guidance that just came out this week. So yes, we are there.
Perfect. And that actually kind of segues into, I believe, both of you now. Is there any equivalent to that FDA guidance that came out this week in terms of EMA or ISO?
Not that I'm aware of. I think another good one to look at is that 2nd edition of the GAMP 5. As far as not being FDA specific, I think it also has some really good guidances in there about computer systems and assurance. Harsh, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. The FDA guidance just came out. The draft guidance came out this week. So I don't know if there's going to be other equivalent coming out from EU or other organizations, but at this point, I don't think there's anything that specifically came out saying this is an equivalent of CSA, or even, I think the CSA guidance still has some time for industry people to comment on it, right? So usually, the guidance came out on September 13th. So there's still some time for people to comment on the guidance, and maybe, we'll get something in the next 6 months or a year, but there's nothing directly right now that ties into the CSA guidance.
Great. For Google Cloud, do we require service level agreements and vendor evaluation process?
I think that's really, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are you using Google Cloud for?
All right. Well, that's the
Yeah.
maybe he will follow back up. That's the question. So that's okay. We can definitely
Yeah.
go to another question if you'd like.
No, I was just going to say, not, jokes aside, you need to understand the intended use of your software, right? If you're using Google Cloud to manage any processes that are GXP regulated processes for which you need to have a validated system, then yes, you should probably, take some time to consider how you're going to go about it, right? But if you are using Google Cloud for a non-GXP or a non-GMP use case, then you can have an assessment or have a justification as to what that use case is and why you've chose to not validate it and just use it as is. So that would be my recommendation on that.
So we have a question in regards to how many companies were impacted by the Kronos ransomware attack, where Kronos was sold as a security and a fail-safe solution. And it seems like this may be the hesitancy lately to move to an eQMS. With that hesitancy, how do we now talk to folks in GMP activities into getting a cloud solution?
I can take that one, Harsh, if you like. I think really vetting your provider for information security, what certs they have, what policies they have around threats and vulnerability management, and what's their information security policy. Like, I think if you can really deep dive into that provider's security policies, certifications, are they doing their due diligence to protect your data? What is their infrastructure like? What is the security that's built around that infrastructure? I think if you can consider all of those things, will help you mitigate those risks around those types of attacks. Harsh thoughts?
Yeah, I would again go back to the initial factors to consider and understand the agreements that you have with your supplier, understand what to expect in scenarios like this, and make sure that that language or those terms and conditions are acceptable, so that when you do come into a situation where there's a attack or your data has been leaked or whatever the case is, you're not debating the resolution when the scenario happens. You have some guidance or some language into your service level agreement or quality agreement of how to go about this. And also, lean on other experts in your organization, like talk to your IT and your IT security teams and see if there are any policies within your organization that require a certain type of response in these attacks, and whether your cloud provider would be able to meet those requirements, right? So you don't want to get to that when you actually have the attack. So think about at the initial stages of drafting the agreements and make sure that those requirements are fulfilled in some capacity.
Absolutely. Thanks. I think you're muted, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe all the questions have been answered, but if there are any final questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer chat, and we can definitely continue our conversation. But if not, Meg or Harsh, do you have any last words or comments in regards to today's presentation that you'd like to share?
I'll let you go first, Meg.
Oh, I just wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to share the benefits of cloud versus on-prem software. Thank you.
Yeah, same. Big thank you to Jan and your team for setting this up, and all the posts and all the promotion that you've been doing to get the right audience. Really love all the questions, and thank you also to the Qualio team leading up to this day to prepare the slides, go through the discussions to make it a really engaging and learning. So I hope you guys learned some things, and if you have any questions that you can't think of right now, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or connect with the company page. Happy to always just jump on a 15-20 minute call and talk about things I'm equally excited, to learn from these kind of sessions and get all these questions. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, also from my side. So from the people from the audience, take a look at the top of the chat. You can see the LinkedIn profiles of Harsh, and also you can follow Qualio. They have really great content, really original stuff that they're also producing really valuable and interesting content. So you should really follow up with them and also connect it to our job, right? And I think if somebody collects this information and share it as you want to do, it can be quite beneficial to quality professionals worldwide, right, Ashley?
Correct. So we just opened this survey this past Monday. So we have been getting fantastic results all around the globe. So it's completely anonymous, but if you want to add in your email, you'll receive the completed report, which will be by the end of September.
Yeah, so you see the link on top of the chat right now, quality salary survey. So feel free. So it's nothing to do with our webinar today, but it's just a fun part, which I think you would everybody would love to take a look at the segmentation, how much people in quality earn in different countries and different positions, probably, right, as you segment it.
Yes, thank you.
Nice. Great. So thank you very much for showing up. Do you want to take a look, Ashley, quickly? We still have a couple of minutes if you want, if there are new questions in the chat that you may want to address.
Yes. So it does look like this will be for Meg. What does Qualio use for cloud?
What do we use for our own quality management system?
Yeah.
We use Qualio.
Question, Yan, unless you see something that I don't, but I think that was it. But again, what Harsh said and what Meg and Yan have been saying, if there are any further questions, we're always available to continue the conversation.
Exactly. Great. So thanks again for anyone who attended today. I'm looking forward to seeing you at our upcoming webinars. I want to thank Qualio for also bringing their own expert and sponsoring this event, the certificate that everybody will get, and for getting Harsh to be part of this webinar. And we're looking forward to many more events together with external and internal speakers, which we will have this next year. So yes, stick with us and you